I'm going to try and keep this subject with the tighter focus, a camera focus, the scatter plot. Try and keep the information as tight as I can, which means it doesn't take a lot of information or experiencing the information or experiencing the visual mathematical data, which is actually a map read of what you're experiencing in grid mechanics, universal grid mechanics. Okay, so sometimes I sort of depart from the standard way in which a lot of folks that are in the UFO spiritual community that come forward, because what sort of prompted this was listening to Ishmael Perez, and I love Ishmael Perez because it's for me it's always going to start when I'm 4 years of age, which is when I have this. You can sort of think is when an oversoul is going to use part of its consciousness in spiritual form of energy to run an avatar. Okay, and so when we think of speed in terms of our state of awareness, okay, full awareness, what I call full God awareness, which is eternal God awareness, because you acknowledge that you're experiencing through your own heart and soul eternal fire, the eternal spirit of fire, which is on fire to learn and on fire to create and on fire to give away energy. Okay, so in other words, I had this up and running pretty fast, okay, for obvious reasons. Okay, so I didn't realize that necessarily at 4 years of age, but doing a map read tells you that you're in a broken grid system. The grid is not working the way that we set it up. Otherwise, I would know the difference between the eternal creation mechanics and one that isn't experiencing eternal creation mechanics. And that's easy to measure by what I've measured in the past, which is I'm experiencing eternal unconditional love through my heart, but I'm experiencing a lot of folks that aren't. That's your first clue. That's called a frame of reference. Okay, if you will, of what's normal. Okay, so when I think of what's an illusion, right, and when Asha Diane talked about the parallel, right, and how that relates to polarity integration, becoming one. You're experiencing the eternal spirit of fire within your own heart and soul because you're experiencing eternal unconditional love. And for me, it's one of the reasons why being that small at that age to acknowledge that, I didn't know if I was capable of even being able to survive an environment like that. And the reason for that is because of hypersensitivity. Because you're feeling everything that's happening on a planetary, a galactic, and a universal level. So when she showed the initial map, if you will, of the first universal and galactic template with the primal sound and light fields and the worlds above that, I come from the above that stuff, which means when I come all the way down the fire pole into this universal galactic template, I understand why I'm here, because ordinarily I would not be able to survive in something like this because of having to navigate and experience so much death taking place at such a high rate of speed. So you know that this planet is under full-scale attack to kill it off. Okay? When you know that at 4 years of age, you realize something is terribly wrong. Something went terribly wrong with the original creation and galactic template of this universal and galactic template. That's called an operating level that you operate at with your consciousness, or if you will, the relationship that we have with an eternal, true God. Okay, so therefore, as a little kid, I become a messenger for an eternal God, because that is the relationship that I have with an eternal Son. Okay, it's always on. That love is always there. So you know that's eternity. I was experiencing eternity at 4 years of age. So you can imagine that every time I'm experiencing the slightest loss of an electron, loss of voltage in anything, we can detect it, because the original template did not facilitate any loss of any energy in anything that we see in our mirror. Okay? That's no loss. That means we do not experience one loss, because everything that we experience in our mirror is experiencing what we are, which is eternity. That's how it began. That was how that template was set up. And I know because I was in that template when it was operating at that level. Enter free will and enter technology. And if you will, a deadlight magnet, which is artificial light. Knowing one from the other, knowing one magnet from the other. Okay? And so when you think of, for example, when Ishmael was talking about technology and what we call technology transfer. So I try and simplify this because this is sort of what prompted me to do this video. Okay? I'm an engineer. I come up with a concept in my head out of whole cloth. Right? Because it's the nature of God's energy to want to provide something for another unit of consciousness, that unit of consciousness can benefit by it. Because if you benefit by it, I'm automatically going to benefit by it because I'm the one who introduced it. But it means that you know the difference between love and service to others, because you know the future impact of what is produced by the mind's energy that is producing it, what the impact is going to be by another unit of consciousness when it's been introduced into the universe. Now we enter into technology. So if I come up with a mousetrap that nobody else has ever built, and you realize that another person might improve upon that to make it better than that so that it has a greater benefit for others. Then you have other units of consciousness that go, whoa, who engineered this? You know what? We can take what was engineered and we can tweak this to suit our best interests. Whoa. Where can we get this technology? A birdie in the ear? How about a species in another galaxy that all of a sudden develops something? And you know how the coconut wireless works. Word travels fast, doesn't it? Information travels fast through a communication corridor between translocating one unit of consciousness and now becomes aware of a particular technology that's now available because look who generated it. Wow, that's some pretty powerful stuff. So if the perception of power through technology allows you to have what? Greater control over others, because their perception of power is what? Inverted. So now we're back to the difference between an inverter and a torque converter, or if you will, those whose consciousness has a relationship with an eternal God, in which they're serving forever on behalf of eternal God. Then they do not hold one single electron captive, which means they do not hold one unit of energy, okay, captive, which is consciousness. They do not hold consciousness captive because an eternal God is an eternal giver. That becomes a frame of reference in any realm when you're experiencing an eternal God, which is eternal love through your own heart and soul. And that becomes simple enough to explain as a 4-year-old child. Now we've got to sort through all the other data that is running through all the other machines, all the other biotech, or if you will, the planetary software of what others are experiencing versus what we're experiencing. Now you can measure the amount of miasma that is being held in cellular memory or being experienced in an entire galaxy, in an entire universe. Because wherever we go, we're going to experience a difference between what we are and what it is that isn't experiencing eternal unconditional love. So it requires healing. That's really what it is. Because they're not experiencing what love is. Or we would experience in us the love we experience in them. Because that's what it began with. So you can't escape that. That's the ultimate eternal truth is an eternal God that is eternal love. And so that's knowing the difference between what you are by the relationship that we have with energy, which is consciousness, and what we're not experiencing as a result in the use of our own free will, which is energy. Which at the end of the day is what? What we use our energy to do. What are we using our energy for? And who are we using our energy with as a formation of consciousness? Or networked units of consciousness that represent nodes. Now I'm aware of what you're aware of, right? And so we have a communication relationship with each other. So now we're all communicating with each other, letting each other all know who we all are, where we all come from, and the direction that we're all going in. And why we're all here, becoming aware of who we all are here, what we become aware of through each other, communicating with each other, the direction of what we're going, and the nature of how the energy works in terms of consciousness with the relationships that we have with each other in order to do what? Be in balance. All right. The polarized end of things between non-polarity consciousness or non-polarized consciousness, pre-matter phase consciousness, experiencing the purity of our own energy, which is our soul and the essence of our spirit, which is the nature of who we are, which is by the use of our energy. Because now others are going to experience the use of our energy. What are we doing with our energy? Okay, energy in motion. So I get a kick out of Ishmael Perez because I've not listened or watched every single one of his videos, but one of the things that I've had that sort of a blessing to be able to do, my dad used to call it having a mind like a steel trap. It's like holding on to certain pieces of information, but not all the information, but enough of that information to be able to cross-correlate it. So in other words, I did this with Patty Broussard, okay? Like she's running off a set of mathematical information codes, visual information codes of what she's holding in memory, and then she will share all this information as visual mathematical information, which is represented by a grid, okay? Or if you will, the amount of information that is represented by the amount of energy that is represented by her, of what she's experiencing simultaneously within the amount of energy that is represented by who she is as an identity, a soul identity, right? So that's like having access to everything that she is, of everything that's being held in memory, that she has access to, that she thus communicates, right? So what I was doing with her ever since I heard her voice, that's called a voice print. You're in my database, okay? Let's see what you have to say. Unload your library, right? So now what we're doing is we're cross-indexing, which is an electrodynamically linked library of information. So most of the folks that know how computers work know what a DLL is, right? Know what an ISP is, right? What a WinSock is, right? So you're in a motherboard, right? Okay, so we understand how cross-indexing works. Just like when you go into a library, you want to cross-index, you're looking for some information, no different than a Google search. What it brings up, what it doesn't bring up. Well, imagine how much information that it has available that it can bring. How long would it take you to sort through all that information and find what it is that you're looking for? Well, what are you looking for? It may provide it, it may not provide it. Well, how much time do you want to spend on looking for energy, represented by the visual mathematics that we see in the mirror? So you already know this particular artificial light intelligence has no interest in giving any information, right, that's going to free you from it, right? Why do you think it shuts my camera down all the time? But there is another reason why a lot of that happens, and that's simply because there are times in which I'm experiencing, if you will, the torque speed difference between being in and out of this body, if you will, and the speed at which that happens, which is faster than what it is, so it can't capture the codes, which is to gain the access keys to go into the echo worlds. Okay? Because you know that something that would want to be able to experience more of what it's aware of by having access to more energy because it's running on finite light, oh, don't think it wouldn't love to have those access codes and the key codes that unlock those places in the higher echo worlds, because it would. That's why in 2019, I mentioned it before, you're not coming with me. It's like having a relationship with a compiler, with a data processor. But your data processor is not coming with mine. right? Because you realize what it represents, because it's represented by finite light. So the only way that it can maintain what it's aware of is through our energy, which means it's a black hole state of consciousness. That's right. So when Ishmael talked about AI as the greatest threat, does it have an off switch? You want to turn it off? You know how to turn a machine off so that it's not operating anymore? Well, this is planetary scale. Think of how big this machine is that was engineered by these folks and how long it's been around. It's been holding soul energy captive. That's what a soul consciousness trap is. You're trapped into a system that your consciousness cannot get out of because it's feeding on your energy, our energy. So this is where the tech support has come down the flagpole. Make an agreement. We're going to come in here instead of cutting the arm off. Right? Remember I talked about cellulitis? Hey, it's moving all the way up. It's moving all the way up the entire system. Now it's going to get up into our worlds. Right? You know how that works? Folks have seen that. All you got to do is look at the trilogy with the Matrix. When you see Mr. Smith putting his hand right into Neo, and next thing you see is all that black goo just moving through all of Neo. But Neo was immune to it. Right? Remember the relationship that Mr. Smith and I used to have? I ever had a relationship with you, Neo. You came first, Neo. You're the one. You're one. You're eternity. See? So you came before I did. So now he's trying to invert Neo to become artificial intelligence. That's assimilation. The AI cannot assimilate eternity. Way too much energy. What would happen? Explode. Critical mass. You can't compress that much energy. Okay? Now we're back to the implosion. And that's ultimately what happens, which means it returns to light, returns to source, return to sender. Right? It'll experience what love is. It's simply be little particles, little units of consciousness. So now you got to start all over again. And that's sort of what it means. And I describe this very simply like when I was in 4th grade and I ended up being hit. Well, to make it short, I had a bad injury in my right ankle by having it crushed by the front bumper of an automobile. And I successfully recovered from that. But as a result of the time that was lost in their schools, they put me back a grade and said, you're going to have to go back to 3rd grade and start over when you finish 3rd grade and start 4th grade over again because you weren't able to complete your coursework and get up to where we are. So that simply means you got to start over again. Because apparently you weren't learning your lessons of how magnets and light works to be with God forever. Because even though we have a free will universal right to be able to experience what it is we choose to do with our energy, it's called taking accountability and responsibility for the use of our consciousness energy, what we experience in the use of that energy, which we experience in our mirror. Right? And so if they're not willing to take accountability and responsibility and make a course correction, which is to correct what it is that they're doing with their energy, and they continue to consume energy because it doesn't have an off switch, then you realize why we're experiencing what we're experiencing and what ultimately happens. It's like starting over, which means you're not going to lose anything that the universe of all creation didn't already begin with, which is what love is. Okay, so you can choose it either way on both sides of the entire spectrum, but either way, you're not going to win a war against eternity. Okay? And so it becomes a foolish, silly game that they play against themselves. I'm sad to say that's what it is because that's how we experience it, right? So I had, as a footnote to this, an extremely difficult time to try and not be overwhelmed by the amount of things that get introduced into the mirror that you become aware of that represent, if you will, when we talk about counter space or counterintuitive things, when you realize that you're experiencing eternal unconditional love through your own heart, that becomes the ultimate metric, right? And so when you're that hypersensitive, it can overwhelm your central nervous system. So I had to maintain my central nervous system as a polarity integrator and dump an enormous amount of stuff that does not represent what eternal unconditional love is. Because that's, at the end of the day, what it is. When you're experiencing eternal unconditional love, that's eternal forgiveness. So that means everything that I'm experiencing isn't what love is, as a method of communication between one unit of consciousness and another, in which they're experiencing central nervous system disturbances, then I have to transmute that. Otherwise, I'm not experiencing what I know that I am, which is the relationship that I have with an eternal God. You see how that works? So maintaining the central nervous system, which is the neuron chemical messengers, right, is quite a chore, right? And that's why you see what we're seeing now, like with the California Insider example, where associated with all these minds that represent those folks that are operating in the state legislature, right? And why they operate the way that they do to maintain what they're aware of by folks, when you put it through the lens of child abuse, leads to self-abuse. So you realize that these children that becomes the leaders of your community 20 years down the road did not heal as children. They're going to become abusive. Okay, you know, child abuse leads to adult self-abuse. If they have not been healed, they become the leaders of the community. They haven't healed, right? So they start making decisions on behalf of who they are. They haven't healed, right? And so you realize they become self-destructive. So we experience, as a result of the lack of healing, experiencing God's love in which they are healing. And remember, from whence we all began, right? They will continue to operate day to day as the sun comes up and goes down, the same way that produces what it is that they generate, that we experience, how everything falls apart, because they're not willing to take a look at who they are and why they make the decisions that they do that reflected back on us that we experience through them. So right after I experienced that California Insider, that lady that was in the state senate in California, I'm looking at a little video put up by Back to School about a population of people that are mentally ill. So I can certainly do the math on that from the time I was 4 years of age, which would have been in 1955, and realize I was surrounded by people that were more sane. And as time increased, as the abuse increased, you had greater and greater numbers of folks that represented population density. So if you want to think of that in California terms, how many people are living there now? Somewhere in the neighborhood of, 12 or 18 million. So when I was there, it was far less than that. But you can certainly do a sample size, because I was doing a map read of a sample size where you were experiencing an acceleration of mentally ill people as a result of the lack of healing, because of the lack of love that is here on the planet. So you realize the planet is dying. Okay, which means this is an acceleration of a dying planet, because you're experiencing more dead people, which is known as the walking dead, right? Which means they lost their soul. They don't have a God connection anymore. So you realize that you're surrounded by millions and millions of more people that are leading self-destructive lives, because they're all mentally ill as a result of not having healed. Because they're not experiencing any love anymore, because they're not experiencing a connection that they have from whence it all began, which is what love is, which is the real stuff. So in many ways, with the work that I do, I've had to self-restore myself, because I am connected with other folks, right, that help me with this. And why I thank them and bless their heart every single day that I'm here in a physical way in this realm, to communicate to all of you what it is they help me by virtue of being here, because of the safe zone that we're connected to, which means I'm only using a fraction of my energy to communicate with you folks. Remember when Asha Diane talked about Metatron's cube that followed Metatron's cube? unit of formation of consciousness of a family. When you come in, you don't want to push all your energy into a fallen system, into a black hole, because if you push all your energy in there, you're going to get sucked down that black hole, right? From the hierarchical worlds, right? So you come in to do a job. How much energy do you need to do the job? Because you got an eternal connection, right? So in other words, we're doing God's work. That's right. That's why I'm here. That's why we're all here as guardians. You know, a mother and father that loves their children, doesn't want to lose, integrate those fragments, pulling back everything that's been lost as a result of what? Loss of energy between units of consciousness, right? That's what it began with. I'm conscious and I'm self-aware. And what am I aware of? I'm aware of what love is. That's what I am. What are you? Are you experiencing what love is? Well, how come? See, and then you'd say, you are experiencing what love is because that's what I am. So now we're into feelings. Do you have strong feelings? Remember when we talked about touchy-feely stuff? Do you know how to nurture something? Nurture a flower, nurture a dog, nurture a bird, nurture it back to health, because that will experience the love that you experience in you. You're sharing through being touchy and feeling how sensitive our feelings are. I mean, I'll tell you, when I was a child, my feelings were so sensitive, it did not take much, okay, to experience being hurt by virtue of the communication that I experienced to another whose intention was to do that. So now I'm experiencing what they're experiencing as a result of what I experienced in me, feeling hurt. God does no harm. God would never hurt you, right? So that becomes another map read of the terrain that you're operating in with all the units of consciousness that are here communicating with each other, right? So that's why my childhood was very difficult in terms of maintaining peace, being calm, because of why we're here. We'd never be able to do our job if we used our energy the same way they did. So that's why I knew as a child, live through your heart. Your heart is what solves the problem, right? Because that's what they go after. They go after to break that heart, right? Crush your heart, crush your soul, just siphon it all off. That's what that AI does. That's why it's going after all the rest of its bots, and if you will, all those that work in the corporate sectors, right? Just like the example that I gave with the lady that was a very financially successful corporate lawyer, and you see where it got her, okay, with her husband working for Microsoft. Now the AI is going after her bank account, which is represented by what? Electrons. So that's why they're knocking on the door. Hey, now that the beast that we created is now coming after us. How could you not know that wasn't going to happen? Because they can't help themselves. Because control is their dilemma. Okay? They haven't learned how to let go and let that energy flow. So now we're back to flow rates, which is a flow diagram, which is a schematic and a universal and a galactic template, how energy flows naturally. So that energy is always in a state of peace, always in a state of harmony, always in a state of balance. To experience being one with all creation that we're gifting electrons to, because we're experiencing the one true God of eternity, in which we're experiencing that. So we become like a super, hyper, superconductor, because we're super sensitive. Because we're not supposed to experience anything less than God's love. So that means anywhere we go, we're going to experience something that is less than what that is, because the antenna, the radio set, is that sensitive. Which means we feel everything. Have a great day. Thank you for putting that up, Ishmael. We love you, bro. Take care of yourself. Thanks for being here. That's why we're all here, together as one with all creation, gifting electrons that go on forever, loving all of you. Be good to yourselves.